Hi guys, this is Daryl and welcome back to Book Odyssey. Today I'm going to be looking at 6 more must-read classic sci-fi books. This video follows on from my first classic sci-fi must-read list, which I did a little while back. If you haven't watched that yet, I'll leave a link to it here. So let's just jump right into my first book, which is The Dispossessed by Ursula Le Guin. The Dispossessed, an Ambiguous Utopia is a 1974 utopian science fiction novel by Ursula Le Guin, set in the fictional universe in a series of science fiction novels known as the Hainish Cycle. The story of the Dispossessed takes place on the fictional planet Furoris and its moon Heiress. The ruling power on Furoris gave a faction of rebellious revolutionaries the right to live on the Heiress moon 200 years before the events in the book, and they formed what is essentially a communist society, opposed to the capitalist society depicted on Furoris. The protagonist, Shevek, a brilliant physicist from the arid anarchist moon, is attempting to develop the principle of simultaneity, a scientific breakthrough which would make instantaneous communication across space possible. The breakthrough would revolutionise the interstellar civilizations in the collection of unified Federation worlds to which Furoris belongs. It is Shevek's life's work, but on the Heiress moon it's being stifled by jealous colleagues, bureaucracy and ideology, so he travels to Heiress' sister planet Furoris, hoping to find more liberty and tolerance there. But he soon finds himself being used as a pawn in a deadly political game. The Dispossessed won both the Hugo Award and the Nebula Award in 1975 and is notable for achieving a degree of literary recognition unusual for science fiction works, something Le Guin managed to do throughout her writing career. I'm a big fan of Le Guin's writing, and in The Dispossessed she manages to capture and explore political themes very relevant at the time it was published, and arguably still relevant today, drawing perceptive parallels and holding a mirror up to our own way of living as a society, while at the same time creating complex characters that pull you through the story. The next book I have is Ubik by Philip K. Dick. Ubik is a science fiction novel that was first published in 1969 by American science fiction legend Philip K. Dick. The story is set in a future 1992 where psychic powers are utilised in corporate espionage, while technology allows recently deceased people to be maintained in a lengthy state of half-life type hibernation. Ubik follows Joe Chip, a technician at a psychic agency who, after an assassination attempt, begins to experience strange alterations in reality that can temporarily be reversed by a mysterious store-bought substance known as Ubik. As one of Dick's most acclaimed novels, Ubik was chosen by Time magazine as one of the 100 greatest novels since 1923. A Time critic described it as a deeply unsettling existential horror story, a nightmare you'll never be sure you've woken up from. Ubik is provocative and has many themes, such as the questioning of an existence of an afterlife. What I found most compelling about the book is that throughout you really don't know what is going on. You're just being pulled through the events in the same way that the group of characters are, and you're just as confused as they are. Ubik is definitely one that will stay with you for a while after you're done reading, if you're anything like me. I found myself thinking back on it, trying to make connections or see things that I couldn't quite get at the time, but stuff that slowly dawned on me afterwards. It is definitely a thinker. My next book is George Orwell's 1984. In George Orwell's 1984, the world is under complete government control. The fictional dictator Big Brother enforces omnipresent surveillance over the people living in the 3 intercontinental superstates remaining after a world war. The story follows government employee Winston Smith, whose job in the Ministry of Truth involves rewriting of history to suit his country's leader's current agenda. He begins a journal documenting his misery and his constant state of fear. Events see him become involved with Julia, where together they revel in the hatred of society and eventually become involved with an underground group known as the Brotherhood. This is one of my all-time favourite classic dystopian books, but it certainly has a place on this list as well. It's bleak, it's depressing, it's shocking, it's violent, it's quite hard to read. Not hard as in it's difficult, but it's emotionally savage, but it's also gripping and presents a version of ourselves as people that is truly horrifying. If you haven't seen my all-time favourite dystopian classics video, I'll leave a link here for you. Next on my classic sci-fi must-read list is War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells is possibly one of the most well-known classic science fiction novels, being first published serially by Pearson's Magazine in the UK and by the Cosmopolitan magazine in the US in 1897. The War of the Worlds chronicles the events of a Martian invasion as experienced by an unidentified male narrator and his brother. The story begins when several observatories spot flashes of light on the surface of Mars. A year later, a falling star crashes in rural England, only it isn't a star, it's an invader from Mars. As panic and terror seize the population, we follow the story through the point of view of the unnamed narrator as he attempts to cross the country to reunite with his wife, while bearing witness to the destruction and death caused by the aliens' huge three-legged tripod machines and the derailment of civilization as he knows it. As the Martians tramp across the country, incinerating all in their path with their heat rays and spreading noxious toxic gases, the people of Earth must come to terms with the prospect of the end of the human civilization and the beginning of Martian rule. The War of the Worlds is considered a landmark work of science fiction and has inspired numerous adaptations and imitations. So I reviewed this book recently and found that for me it lived up to its hype of being considered a landmark work of science fiction. Its depiction of an alien invasion teeters between sci-fi and horror and explores a number of themes that had me gripped, such as Darwinism and the stripping away of humanity's inherent belief that is the apex of evolution. The next book I have is Poul Anderson's Tau Zero. Tau Zero, published in 1970, follows the crew of the starship Leonora Christine, a flagship colonization vessel crewed by 50 men and women traversing to the nearby star of Beta Virginis to discover if one of the planets orbiting the star could potentially host human life, and if it can, begin a colony there. The ship in which they travel is powered by a Bussard ramjet, an actual theoretical method of spacecraft propulsion proposed in 1960 by the physicist Robert W. Bussard. This engine is not capable of faster-than-light travel, so the voyage is subject to relativity and the dizzying effects of time dilation. This means the crew spend 5 years on board, but 33 years will pass on Earth before they arrived at their destination. The ship accelerates at a constant rate for most of the first half of the journey, eventually achieving a percentage of light speed. The plan is to decelerate at the same rate during the second half of the journey. However, the Leonora Christine passes through a small nebula before the halfway point, damaging the deceleration field generators. Since the Bussard engine must be kept running to provide particle radiation shielding, and because the hard radiation produced by the engines, the crew can neither repair the damage nor turn off the ramjet. The only choice they have is to keep going, ever increasing their velocity and reaching nightmarish speeds. This is a classic hard sci-fi book, which goes deep into the science, so be prepared for that. If you're anything like me, you might not know what is going on when it comes to the science, but it does add to the realism and immerses you in the story. What Anderson does really well in Tau Zero is marry the hard sci-fi concepts with characters that are complex and fully realised, delving into the effects of long-term space travel not only on their mental states, but on their relationships too. The last book I have for you guys is Foundation by Isaac Asimov. Foundation introduces the concept of psychohistory, which has the potential for predicting and possibly influencing future social development and events. Everything begins with Harry Seldon, the creator of psychohistory, predicting that Trantor, the Galactic Empire's hub and capital, will be destroyed within 300 years as the climax to the Empire's fall. He predicts, through psychohistory, that this fall will lead to a 30,000-year period of anarchy before the Second Empire is established. He proposes a project to influence events so that this period of anarchy will be shortened to 1,000 years and not 30,000. The project, known as the Foundation, will undertake the production and dissemination of an Encyclopedia Galactica, which will contain all human knowledge on Terminus, a small planet on the periphery of the galaxy. Half a century passes and the Foundation, which, in its remote position on Terminus, has lost contact with Trantor and the Galactic Empire. it's faced with the first of what is called the Seldon Crises, events which force it into choices that will eventually lead to the Second Empire. Each crisis is a major turning point in the future of the Foundation. Should the leaders of the Foundation make the wrong decision, the Foundation may fall or be corrupted to the point of not being able to carry out the mission of creating a new galactic empire. The stories that follow take place over centuries and revolve around several Seldon crises as the Foundation gains power, territories, and enemies. The Foundation series is one of the first science fiction series that depicts an empire on a galactic scale, and you can see its influence in many science fiction books today, even though it was written by Asimov 70 years ago. It's simply a must-read for any fan of sci-fi looking to read classics. I recently reviewed the first 3 books in the series, which I'll leave a link to here. So that's it for my classic must-read science fiction 2.0 list. I'd love to get your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like the video to support the channel, and subscribe if you haven't already for more videos from me. We talk all things books, mostly sci-fi with some fantasy too, so if that's your thing then please come and hang out. Until next time guys, happy reading.